Oh, no, this is the highest. I mean, it's no wonder that Prince Charles decided to go to Leeds Library to have a look at some old books rather than come here, when all I've got is my laptop and a microphone.
All the royalties in here, you don't need to worry about.
There are people waiting outside for hours in Leeds in the cold. There's nothing to do in Leeds. And their library's not got a bingo hall stuff next to it. So the people of Dewsbury, obviously, massive. Art smart. Right, to talk about that, we're talking about Rugby League and the World Cup, which is it's coming towards its end, which is a bit sad. Phil Kaplan. This is a panel with Phil Kaplan, so Phil, over to you. That's what he said on the Kirklees Council don't know I'm here.
Well, welcome to the home of Eddie Waring.
There you go. Anyone else?
Some local
It's Randy Cummins, if he...
He is on his way. He's texting. He's on his way. He's royalty around here.
Yes, I'd like to point out I'm not from Dewsbury. I'm from Batley, which could be the other end of the world, couldn't it?
Why are we not in Batley Library? Because we've got the coach of Batley here as well, Craig Lingard. I mean, any Dewsbury fans in? No. Any Dewsbury fans in?
It's going to be a tough audience.
Sorry, there's only one Dewsbury fan in as well, so that's... Which everyone support? What's going on? Not going to be Leeds fans, are they?
Yeah.
Oh.
They're everywhere.
Everywhere. How are you, Craig?
I'm very well, thank you. Yeah, just 4 days in Portugal golfing, so come back to this weather.
I thought it was gleaming.
Yeah.
Ian Laybourn, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. I'm going to Spain golfing in 2 weeks. Where are you going, John?
I'm going to Australia for Christmas, and that helps. No, golf. No, just swimming.
Do a golf podcast. How are you, John?
I'm good just to say this is not Simone Blue. So Phil's wearing Simone Blue for Saturday, I think. But yeah, this is not.
Well, if you were Simone, you wouldn't be speaking to us, would you? Because
No, I'd be
oh
banned.
no, are they speaking now? Or are they banned again?
Well, I think the power of Andrew Voss has shamed them into speaking. Yeah, helps promote the World Cup that you want to be big and best.
Some of its own.
Momentum. Where's Rod Studd when you need? Just think about this. The people in Warrington, they had the Civvy Town versus the Sippy Town, was it? Get it right? As we used to just call them hackers, when it was much easier in the olden days. And in York, the entertainment there on Thursday for the good people of York is us. I mean, that's a bit starting from, isn't it? We could do a dance. If we got what's the Leeds cultural dance thing?
Sorry, you said Leeds and cultural in the same.
I mean, obviously in Batley it's the conga, because we've seen Black Lace do it on that video. But have you been watching much of the World Cup in Portugal?
Yeah, we watch every game. Yeah, we managed to find plenty of sports bars over there that quite accommodating putting the games on. So we managed to get every game over there. So it's passed a bit of time in the evening.
What have you enjoyed of the past week or so?
I just think that, as Phil says, I think it's building momentum now. And I suppose for me, the shock for me is probably how uninspiring New Zealand have been. And for me, at the start of the tournament, they were my tips to win it, but unless they get a considerable amount better than they have been in the last, certainly the semi-final, then they'll be going home. So that's been my shock. I've been pleasantly surprised at how clinical England have been as well, and how professional England have been in their performances. And it's been good to see, I suppose, some players that have taken a bit of flack, a bit of stick this season for their form. So playing under a coach that they want to play under, and it certainly helps.
I mean, it was great because not going to not admit that before the tournament thing. George Williams, what's he doing in the squad? Warrington have been rubbish, and he goes out there and he plays as if he was George Williams of the past.
Yeah, I think it's trusted by Sean Wayne. I think he knows what's expected from Sean Wayne, and he can go out there and deliver it. And you can tell that he's playing with a confidence on him, with maybe a coach that believes in what he can do and trusts him to be able to do what he can do. It doesn't seem to be as structured as maybe what it is at Warrington. And he seems to have a lot freer rein to go out and do what George Williams wants to do. So I think that pressure's taken off, and you can tell you remove the shackles from him and he's out there and plays really well.
Is it going too well for England? It's all a bit too good at the minute.
Well, I suppose it's the converse argument with New Zealand, isn't it? You expect New Zealand to get better, so do you expect England to get a little bit worse? I'd certainly, and I think if that would have happened at the start of the tournament, we'd probably consider it as a success. But as they've been going so well as they have done now, I think it's gone from how are England going to do can England win this? And I think they certainly can the way they've played so far.
Obviously, we know New Zealand are flying out after the game on Friday, because that's the big news story today. If the Tongan fans are still here, can we ship them down to the Emirates? Reverse the flag. It'll be all right. They can support. Father Christmas must be around. Get him down there. Ian, what's your highlight been so far?
You mentioned it there, the Tongan fans, I think. They've certainly had a touch of colour. I would love to have seen them beat Samoa, just for the fact that we'd have all those fans down in London. They certainly had a touch of colour, don't they, and a bit of excitement. I was in Auckland in 2017 when there were about 30,000 of them. I don't know where they all came from, but they seem to follow them all around the world, don't they? So that's been the highlight for me, and seeing all the Lebanese fans came out. There must have been a couple of hundred Lebanese fans watching their country, and they even spotted a few Greeks. So it's been a true World Cup in that sense, hasn't it? Getting all the minnows following them.
John, your highlight? Obviously Australia just battering everyone apart from in wheelchair.
I think Greece has probably been my highlight. I think the Greek story of just getting to the World Cup, qualifying when the sport is banned in their country, all their sacrifices, and how they performed. Obviously, the 3 big losses, but I think they competed in every game, and what that means to them. You could really see, they had more domestic players than any other country. Even though obviously a heavy heritage base, but the way that they put all that together, I think, was really impressive. But there's been a lot of highlights. I think the Tonga Papua New Guinea game in the group stages was fantastic. There's been a lot of great games. The quarterfinals on Sunday and Saturday night, the best 2 games so far. And I think, as Phil said, it really is building. There's 2 mini finals. Obviously, a lot of women's and wheelchair games to come as well. But I think we're set for a massive weekend and a massive final at Old Trafford.
I think we've been very lucky, those of us who've been following it, because, again, the first part of the tournament is stories that you never normally get. So spending time watching, the Brazilian women and their enthusiasm, which, we're jaundiced because we've done this for years, and it all, the fixtures are out. We're playing everybody 18 times again. It's a cycle, and when people break it, it's really refreshing. So, you were saying the Jamaican guys have been fantastic, just to interview them and talk to them about what it means. Now you're getting to the end where we're talking about performance. But I just think the great thing for those who've followed rugby league for a long time is these different cultures that are coming and playing. What have we got in common with Papua New Guineans that are on the terraces of the Totally Wicked Stadium, all made up in headdresses and body paint? We all love rugby league. And I think that has been great. And whilst people might want to talk about attendances and margins, it's not actually about that.
We want to see people at Mount Pleasant and Tetley Stadium, is it called these days? What do you call it? Ram Stadiums. Dressed up like the Papua New Guineans. That's what we want. Full, almost naked people in paint. No. No.
Sounds like a Sunday night from my youth, doesn't it?
Shouldn't forget the Fijians as well. You talk about the highlights. I mean, the Fijian hymns will live with me for a long time. I don't know about anybody else, but every time they play, for 2 days after, I'm humming Hallelujah in my head. I can't get it out of my head. It's fantastic.
We found the same with the Irish national anthem as well.
Yeah.
You're wandering around going shoulder to shoulder. What am I doing that for? Because I just heard the Irish national. It's brilliant.
You're trying to qualify for Ireland for the next World Cup.
We're all eligible for somebody.
So it's only 3 years away.
And that's the other joy. That all of the... I'm not fortunate again last night to be with the American wheelchair team. Only the second game that they've ever played. They're talking in a way that their enthusiasm is infectious, and that's what we had when we first came into the sport. They want to go home and they want to create a domestic league, and the exciting thing for them, as it is with Brazil and their women, is they know they're back in 3 years' time. It's quite quickly. It's been brilliant.
The qualifying will start soon, won't it?
But for the women and the wheelchair, they're in. They know they're in.
Yeah.
But for the men, it starts.
Start next year,
Yeah.
won't it?
Any low points? Got to get
What
some
are you
negative.
looking
Got to
at
get because you're negative journalist.
No, no, I think like any tournament, there's always ups and downs. I mean, I think the debate about ticket prices has been interesting, and I can understand it in part, but I think there are a lot of factors involved with that. I mean, I think there's been a culture of discounted tickets in this country for years.
I'm still waiting for the tickets for £1 if I'm
Yeah.
an NHS worker for Friday. You know, even though I'm not, I'm just going to get them anyway.
Well, somebody told me, it might have been Phil actually, or someone else, that I think there was 20,000 NHS tickets available to, and only a few thousand have been actually taken up, and they're free. So I think the attendances, some of the attendances have been disappointing. Other ones, I think they've been as expected. But I think also they're built, and if you look at the England games have been particularly well attended, and I think hopefully we get massive attendances this weekend and for Old Trafford. But I mean, there's been a lot of high points. I mean, you never get everything right, but I think the players have conducted themselves really well, and the coaches have pretty much, you know, particularly, you know, like Michael Checker on Friday night, he was fantastic. You know, I think he left he had a flight at 4 a.m. to get down to London to coach Argentina to beat England in rugby union on Sunday, but he was talking for over 20 minutes about, you know, the experience and what it meant to him and about the success of the World Cup and why we have to persist with this format. So there's been a lot of high points.
That's quite good of him to sit there and talk to people for a while. It's not every coach does that.
Yeah, and Mel Meninga was the same. You know, I think there was a great Phil was there. There was a great and Ian was there. It's a great point where one of the Australian print journalists tried to get Mel Meninga to say how he was offended because New Zealand were the number ranked team, and he flatly refused to give him his back page headline. But that'll be a great game. Great, I think New Zealand have been on paper. They should be the best in the world, but they have been disappointing. Fiji were quite unlucky not to win that game, but I think in an 80 minutes, you know, any of those players could star it on road.
You know, the stuff we saw in the Paralympics, which probably Rugby Union tried to claim, it's just murder ball. It's not even rugby, but that is brilliant. I think with the girls, I think it's a masterstroke. Not often do we talk our game up and think we've got things right, and you might think, you know, people point to attendances and prices and things like that, but having the men's, the women's, the wheelchair and the PDRL in together, I think it's been a masterstroke. I think it shows what we are as game in Europe. It's embracing, and we're punching miles above our weight.
Yeah, I just had to highlight, I think the BBC coverage has been fantastic, and have all those games live on TV. You can't, that's priceless. Like the Rugby League doesn't get in England.
Moving University Challenge. To the
Yeah, and the
Tuesday.
gardening. I don't know who
Oh,
this,
Monty
I don't know the
Dolly
guy
was really upset,
Yeah, I don't know.
wasn't
he? Oh,
He's got 150,000.
There'll be some letters and points of view now, won't there? But yeah, I just think the timing of it and everything, I just think, and I was just like, well, and I'm not on social media, but I can see bits and bats when I won, and I was exactly like what people there, just blown away by it. I mean, we generally, the game of rugby league is we take for granted more often than not, don't we? And you forget that, but I've been blown away with everything. I think the things around it, especially the weekend, it's just so rich in just, you know, where it's from and what they bring to it, and I think I'm enjoying that as much as what's happening on the field.
You must be pleased that when you played international rugby league for Great Britain and England, and not Ireland because they wouldn't have done this, but in the olden days when we've seen the black and white footage of Great Britain teams on tour doing some kind of weird hacker thing, you must be glad you didn't have to do that. We don't look foolish.
Well, yeah. If it's not in our culture, it's certainly not in mine, and it's a bit almost like close to dancing. And if it was about dancing, I certainly wouldn't be happy with hacker.
Lee Raptor's dancing with Samoa. Throwing himself into it.
Well, then fair play to him.
Honorary Samoan Lee Radford. I've heard the tales. Did you make any royalty in your illustrious playing career? Since everyone was excited by seeing.
I've got a story actually, and it's good. I hope William Putchin's watching. We were laughing about this not that long ago. When it was, what was it? Was it the Silver Jubilee? There was a big thing at Temple Newsroom at the time. There was Leeds captain. There were about 5 or 6 players went up, and there was all kinds of. I think Mel B, Belinda Carlisle. All there was a few. Remember that? Anyway, the Queen was coming, so I'm in a great position here, and there's all these Aussies. So I know where I want to be. I know where I want to be. I'm not sure my legs go in that direction, so moving wheels to get me there, I'm not sure. But I think it's another option of you can continue playing the game, can't you? Where a version of the game when most of your body parts don't work anymore.
I've actually played it once. When I said played it, I went down a tent and sat in a chair and just basically rolled around this sports orbit because I couldn't. A bit like patting your head and rubbing your stomach. You've got to do different things at the same time, and it's the coordination side of it is really difficult. And then there's a ball there, and you're trying to move, and you're looking around where everybody else is. And I said I just ended up rolling around this sports hall trying to control the wheelchair.
Yeah, didn't anybody JJB saying on the telly, he just was going around in circles, he had the ball in one hand and was steering with the other. And he couldn't work out why he was going around in circles. But he's an intelligent man, he's got an MBE now. Is it MBE?
I think the important thing about wheelchair, though, and women's to a lesser extent, is that it doesn't have to follow the template of the men's game. So we spent about 128 years trying to evolve the running game, and with very limited success. There's always something to hold that back, but there's a freshness about the wheelchair and the women's game whereby, you know, if you're sitting watching this in Aberdeen and you want to form a team and you might want to link it to community sports hall or whatever, there's a way of starting rugby league that almost gives us a template to then do men's on the back of it. And I think if you were to say to a television station at the moment who isn't maybe covering rugby league or has just come across the wheelchair in the last 2 or 3 weeks, if we could give you something as quality as this every week, so there was a wheelchair Super League and it was a national competition, would you give us some money to film it? I think they would. So I don't know what the powers would be. We'll be sitting down after the World Cup and deciding what its legacy is. But one of the things should be to divert some funds into wheelchair to sell the rest of the sport. I think it's almost overtaken the traditional way we try and expand it. If you're in Plymouth, for example, and you're Plymouth Argyle Football Club and you want to have a wheelchair rugby league team playing in a wheelchair Super League, there's no reason why you shouldn't. Put the colours of that football team on, take the name for the southwest of England, play Wigan Warriors or Leeds Rhinos or Catalan Dragons or wherever it might be. Sell the sport that way, because when people get into the wheelchair, and it's exactly what Franny was saying, it's rugby league. That you watch it for a certain amount of time and marvel at the collisions, but then you're watching going, well, it's a third tackle, who's moving for the fourth, and how are they going to get this to the other side, and why is they just looped round, and all of that actually, it gets you into saying, well, I'll watch a bit of the running rugby as well. I think it's been the biggest success of all.
It links a little bit, Phil. I did a bursary report about 2011. It got thrown in some kind of, well, they pull in the bin.
We mention it on here every so often.
And basically talked about the versions of the game and looking at touch. Touch would be a massive thing, because a lot of the top athletes get picked up by football. Football's taking over everything. It's just getting bigger and bigger. But they can play touch, anyone, mix, whatever. Everyone can play touch and look at a version on TV and say, oh, I play that. Well, you might not play exactly what that is, but it's rugby league. It's 6 tackles, it's advancing the ball, it's passing. There's not the collision, but it's a way in, and that's the way. It's and there's other ways. We've opened a door, I think, with the wheelchair. It needs to be, and we need to step through it properly. We need to get all the variations of the game. I remember starting a touch competition around here, actually, and it ended up becoming massive. But some people wouldn't ref it because, I don't ref that. And it's like, why? It's rugby league. It's no, it's different. Yeah, it is different, but it's rugby league. It's just a different version that allows older people, as were then, it were over 35, to carry on playing a version of the game that allows you to go to work the day after.
I've spoken before on the podcast, and I think that's such a missed opportunity when when I moved to England, when I first lived in London, there was a lot of anti-Badine competitions, but in the north, it hardly exists. And you look at Australia and New Zealand, everyone plays, men, women, in their 50s, 60s, and
it's all and
you basically have...
Well,
now there's the NRL,
in,
they televise games, and you've got your Ryan Papenhuyzen, who's played touch for Australia and then gone on to make the NRL. Benji Marshall was another. I mean, it's just a school-based game without the physicality, so you don't have to be battered and bruised.
No, and I think more so introduce it to children and getting it in early, because, it's bizarre. You run as hard as you can into all them people over there. That's what you're telling your children Doesn't make any sense. Now there's a level to get to that, but there's a few steps, and we just need lots more people doing it. That's the thing, because we've seen what a great game, and all these different variations. It's still the same game. It just happens to be some people are sat in wheelchairs, smashing it the hell out of each other. Others aren't. Others can play touch. And
I mean, I think that's the thing for a club like Batley, which you spoke about and written about before. That how do you extend your supporter base? That what you're doing in the men's running game, you're probably almost at your limit of achievement because you are the best part-time team in the sport. But if you had a wheelchair team carrying those colours and a women's team and a PDRL team and an LDRL team, that's how you initially build the club.
That's got to be the next step, not only for clubs like us, but for I think the Rugby League in general. And just to add another version on top of that, so you could have your junior section, you've got your full contact first team, and then you could have your touch, your wheelchair and your women's, and then your PDRL. But you can also have the walking rugby as well for the older end, and which we do at Batley as well. We do that. So there's an avenue open there to get whatever age you are, whatever level of ability you are, whatever physical fitness you are. There's an avenue there to be involved in some sort of sport at your club. So you don't have to be between the age of 20-35 and be the strongest, fittest, fastest. You can be 55-year-old and still be representing your club or taking part in the sport at your club. And I think as a group and as a sport, I think we need to do that. And I think that'll be what will form part of the IMG proposals. Unless you have got this, and this, then you're not going to be considered for Tier A, Tier B or Tier C. And I think you've got to be harsh at times, and I think certainly clubs like us with very, very limited resources, that's what we need to do. We need to look outside the box, and it's going to be difficult, but how do we generate any more money?
But I think the limited resources is interesting because it should be done through the foundation, because I think there are companies out there that are looking at things like wheelchair that would never normally get involved with rugby league. If I'm, let's say, a legal firm or a financial firm, and I don't particularly fully understand the cultural nuances of the men's running game, but I want my name on that England wheelchair team that may well win the World Cup, I'd be ringing up the RFL now saying, my £100,000 is here, what do I get for it? And I think that, even clubs like Batley will have businesses that wouldn't normally come to Rugby League that will say, I want to finance your foundation and I want to see my company associated with the good that you're doing in the community. So I think it does open new financial avenues. And it's not a question of taking the existing amount of money and spreading the jam even thinner. It gives you an avenue to get new money into the club.
Brian asked a question earlier in reference to Steve Mascord's article today about we've now got controversy in wheelchair rugby, which is brilliant. It's only taken a week.
Steve's fault. Blame Steve.
Is it Steve's fault?
Yeah. He did the interviews. Don't look
I
at
led
me.
him down the path.
All right.
I thought it was
so it's
only
your fault too.
I thought it was going to be about Scotland time wasting, which I thought was brilliant. A great way of limiting the score against the French, but without having Steve's article in front of me. One of the French players is disabled and can't rip the tags off a player. So in the first game against Wales, the referees made a decision to adapt the rules slightly.
I think in the previous World Cup he was allowed to make a touch as opposed to a full tag because he is disabled. But then they've decided not to allow that rule in the next game. And
It's convention rather than rule.
yes,
So
I mean it's a new sport.
historically, and bearing in mind the French drew up the rules in the first place, they're now complaining about the rules that were drawn up. They're trying to get an advantage for the final, which is great because now we've got controversy in the wheelchair game. Is absolutely fantastic. Because if England do play France, there are some fantastic narratives that can be written. Not least Seb Bashara, who plays his club rugby in France, but wants to get under the skin of all of those players he plays with because he's an England international. So they've got a player called Jonathan Hivenat, who is one of the fastest. He's the Nathan Collins of French Rugby League, but he has a disability in his hands whereby he can't rip off a tag. Conventionally, including in the last World Cup, which England were robbed of, he has been allowed to touch the tag but not pull it off. And they're now saying because that isn't written in the rules, even though it was a convention in the first game because the referee of that first game allowed it because it had happened in precedent in the past, because it's now not in the rules, if he plays he can't defend in the traditional manner, and the French have complained, saying that he couldn't play in the final against England because you couldn't play with only 4 defenders. To which the answer is good. Let's create some rivalry.
It's an interesting question though, it's because it is, anyone can play it.
Yeah.
But there are obviously a lot
No,
of players
they-
with disabilities, so is it a sport for people who are disabled?
Yes, but it
Or
needs
is it-
writing in the rules.
Yeah,
And as
yeah.
something evolves, like PDRL, which had to go through a whole classification system, the quicker it evolves, the more you've got to make... I mean, the French quite rightly came up with two very good examples of where the adaptation of the wheelchair rules has been made on the basis of the running game and not what fits the wheelchair game. The HIA test, the first one you've got to do is to walk along a white line, which, of course, if you're in a wheelchair, is relatively difficult. The other thing is captain's runs. They made a really good point that disabled people tend to need longer to warm up because they're in a chair. To get their bodies to the point where they're playing at maximum speed is longer than the 45 minutes that you need for each captain's run. And the captain's run is also 45 minutes because of potential weather implications. And they're saying it doesn't normally happen in a sports hall. So you do have to make sure that the rules as written relate to the game as played, and there is that slight imbalance to which the French have a point, but they're using this particular one of pulling off a tag as an indication as to how the game is already stacked up against them. Great.
The defending champions who just won 156.
Great. No. Brilliant. Controversy, we love it.
Well, that's great, Chris. You know, there have been controversies in the women's game that have been shied away from. We just don't talk about for whatever reason. Craig mentioned IMG. Ian, you've seen plenty of reports and plans for the future. How confident are you that we can grow the game going forward? Whatever IMG come up with or whatever who else comes up with, this as a platform, how confident are you that we can do that?
Well, something's got to change, hasn't it? And I've thought for a long time it needs somebody from the outside coming in with a fresh pair of eyes, not tainted by what's gone on in the past and influenced by their own club interests. They need just to take a fresh look at the whole game. And people, IMG have got such a good reputation that I think it's a win-win situation. That, so far, we don't really know what their plans are, do we? We've seen a rough sketch, and a lot of it have been picked from ideas of the past. So I'm a bit disappointed so far that they haven't come out with anything particularly revolutionary. I'm hoping that we might see a little bit more of that when we get to the finer detail. But so far, so good. We need a shake-up, don't we? Rugby League have gone as far as they can. They've basically put their hands up and said, we can't take this any further, we need some help, which is great. At least I can see that. And now it's up to the clubs to give IMG the backing that they need.
John, do you think it'll happen? No self-interest?
Well, I hope it does. I agree with Ian, something needed to change. I think there needs to be fresh leadership and new eyes. But I think some of it is partly down to people actually involved with the game and attitudes and mindsets. I'm not sure how you change those. Because there are people who think they're doing the right thing and, but won't want to change and will refuse to change. And I think we've seen that over the different examples in the last few decades. But yeah, I mean, you do definitely hope for change, and I think this World Cup has been a push in the right step as well. And I think if England could win the World Cup, that would be a massive step for the game. It wouldn't solve all the problems. I think people think that every Super League game will be sold out next year if England won. Are kidding themselves, but it would be a massive boost across all levels. But then the flip side of that is if they don't, it shouldn't be the be all and end all. There has to be change as well, and not just in Super League, but schools getting more involved, amateur clubs. There needs to be a shake-up across the whole board.
It has been great to see the various countries involved in this competition engaging with the local communities they're in. I think the Gillaroos have been out in schools all the time, and they're obviously the best team in the world at what they do. Get more people, get more eyes on the sport. Certainly the viewing figures have been fairly positive.
I think the community engagement. I know I went to Greek training out at Sheffield Hallam, and they'd been out in schools and in the area, and I think every nation's done the same, every team's done the same. There's been a lot of community involvement. That's been great. I think with Greece and Sheffield, obviously you saw the crowd at Bramall Lane. I mean, they were there to see England, but also the Greeks really got involved in the city, and That's fantastic. I think the big step now is December and having a calendar, obviously. So we need to know. I want to talk always about calendars, but I did an interview with Troy Grant 2 weeks ago, and December is supposed to be when there's a lot of reasons why the calendar's been delayed. You can't just sort of, oh, we want a game here. You have to actually make them pay. You have to make them work. But a calendar for the next 10 years, or even for the next World Cup, just to sort of sell the next round of fixtures on the back of the current ones would be huge.
I've had a long question from Michael. He says, would Rugby League in the Northern Hemisphere be better served by hosting between World Cups Australia and New Zealand alternative with another guest Southern Hemisphere team on a rotational basis with fixtures against the home nations and France? The non-touring Southern Hemisphere teams could play against each other in the Southern Hemisphere. This avoids the huge 2-year gap of top-level international rugby league in the Northern Hemisphere that happened after Rugby League World Cup 2013, whilst maintaining top-level international rugby league in the Southern Hemisphere post-season. The Northern Hemisphere teams aren't of sufficient enough quality to draw crowds in Australia and New Zealand, barring England, but England needs to have top-quality international rugby league to build a non-heartland fan base to retain new sponsors who get on board at World Cups, then fall away due to lack of content in the years thereafter. Oh, Michael summed it up. Again, you know what? On the back of that, and mentioning crowds and such, shouldn't we be disappointed that in Hull they've had 2 games and not great attendances in what we're told is a great rugby league city? Yet Middlesbrough turned out in decent numbers for 2 teams who really they should know nothing about in Tonga and Cook Islands. Well,
I think the sort of more related to Michael's point, one thing we do know is that there is guaranteed profit out of this World Cup, that it's a cost-neutral tournament. They need to cover all of those, but the fee that is being paid to the IRL is already fixed. So they know that whatever the amount of money out of the coffers, it's guaranteed. It might be 5 million quid, it could be we don't know what we're talking about because it's Rugby League. We don't actually know the amount, but we know it's there. If it was me and I was in Troy Grant's shoes giving you the interview saying it's difficult to put a calendar together, we need to get all the ducks in the right row, I would be announcing now what you're doing with that money. So as each nation went home, you'd be saying there is a proportion of this profit that's been made into the development in that nation. So Jamaica, for example, won a pitch. Now, if they get nothing else out of this World Cup, they need some land back on the island, which they can brand up with Jamaican Rugby League. Well, if that costs, let's say, £200,000, I don't know what the price of land is in Jamaica.
I imagine it'd be a lot.
I've just but you know, your participation, what you brought to the sport, the fact that you now deserve a legacy project on the back of it, £200,000 from the World Cup profit is going to Jamaica to be spent on a facility whereby you can guarantee more kids will be playing on that ground 7 days a week, purely rugby league. You don't have to get off at 6 o'clock because hockey are using it. If it's the Greeks and they're trying to promote their domestic competition and they need to go to the government and get a match-funded bid to create their domestic competition, well, you've got £100,000 out of the World Cup. You can now go to the government, make that £200,000, and if that pays travel expenses, because roads have got to fly to Athens or whatever it might be, or you want to create a junior competition in schools, that money's earmarked. It has to be for something. We're not just giving it to you to buy ouzo in the bars. And you could do that with virtually every nation. Again, going back to the American wheelchair team, 11 of the 12 are from America. They've been joined by one guy who plays for Wigan, who's of American heritage. Those 11 people all live in different places. They are being tasked to go back and set up a team where they live, to go to disabled people that they know, to the service people that they know, because a lot of them have come through the veterans of the army. Now, again, if you were to say to them, you're going with £100,000 from the profit of the World Cup that you've helped generate to set up that competition, that and if it means that Ireland, for example, which certainly you know a lot about developing rugby league in Ireland, if that Ireland team could be kept together and play an England team in a mid-season international, that is a saleable commodity. I think you'd get, if you played that in Dublin, you would get a stadium of maybe 15,000, 20,000, half or possibly totally full, because that England-Ireland brand means something. And if you've got, the Richie Marsh, you can get Luke Keary over if he isn't selected for Origin in that window. and you could play a full-strength England team that may or may not have made a World Cup final, possibly even won it. And you can get a television deal for that because it's not part of a current existing arrangement. And it costs £50,000 to stage that game or cover the cost of that game. Part of the World Cup profit should be used for that. So I just think we need to be cleverer. We now will have some money, which we've never had before. How are we going to spend it?
I think that's the key issue, that the international game has to wash its own hands, because in the past it hasn't. The club game is what produces what brings in the TV, what pays the players. Clubs have been reluctant, or some clubs have been reluctant to release players because they don't know, is Luke Geary going to be insured? If he does his ACL and misses other Roosters going to be compensated. So that, not to be an IRL apologist, but that's one of the considerations that the discussions has been, that they know, okay, Luke Geary has a calf issue, he's been checked, he's got the best medical care, the Roosters are happy. That sort of situation, which hasn't really happened in the past, and we've had fixtures for the sake of fixtures, so we need to know what is going to make money. You know, having Greece play Lebanon in Beirut would be great, but who pays for most of the Lebanese team to fly out? Who puts them up? You know, you can't expect them to play for, players shouldn't pay for nothing. You know, we're past that stage, and Franny knows more about what players have to go through to get themselves fit and on the field. But yeah, I think that's a big part of it. But we do have games that sell. I mean, you look at Tonga Samoa, you know, you look at England PG, England Samoa. You know, a lot of those games people will pay to watch them because they're fantastic spectacles. So we do need to organise have them in the right venues. And as you said about Middlesbrough, I think it was 12,000 in Coventry for Australia-Scotland. I mean, that was a better turn-up than Huddersfield and Hull, which are rugby league places. So maybe we should be going away from the heartlands more because they're saturated markets.
We'll say we have a international series next year against whoever. Or are we just going to go back to Ellen Road, the KC, or whatever, MKM Stadium, is it called now? And wherever. Or do we try it? Do we be brave, and do we just try and appeal to the same? I mean, this wouldn't be the criticism of this World Cup. We're trying to sell all these games to the same people. We've got 4 games in Warrington, 3 games in Doncaster. But if we say we're going to play the first test in Newcastle, second test in Coventry, third test in London. Now it's going to be a lot of travelling for rugby league people who want to see everything, but maybe you don't have to see everything. It's going to be on telly as well.
Well, I think you need to look at a few things. You know, obviously it's got to earn some money, and it's got, you know, it can't be where the game loses money. But there seems to, there needs to be something put in behind all these things. So, you know, the magic at Newcastle for the last few years, great. Well, let's have some kind of legacy built into that. So, whether that's kids going and tickets and coaching before it, bring them to the game. We've got to start to build this momentum, and it feeds into this the bigger thing that we're just dropping things into a you know, because people think, or we think, or everyone else, they know what rugby league is. Oh, they might do. They might not all know the rules. They've heard of it. They might have seen it, but there's not that many people. When you go in the next town or a football town, we don't really know about rugby league, and that's just here in the north of England. Never mind anywhere else. We need to have that all joined in, where it can't be just dropped in and going, look at this, it's great, and it is. And there will be people, odd people will go. We've just got to build in. We've got to get a bit more professional how we do it. You know, the way, and it might be you have to give thousands of tickets away to kids at first, and that's how you do it. And Rugby Union did it for years for the international game, but now it's in this. That's where we've got to be a bit more serious about it, a bit more planned, where hopefully there's a bit of money to have people who are paid to get people into this and get them into having a go, coming to watch. And that's that version I play. It's nothing like it, but it's get them into it. I'm a rugby league player.
Those kids at Brazil, the Brazil game seem to enjoy it. They're making so much noise.
Yeah, just because I think with that, I think we can look at it a slightly different way as well to get people interested. Is make stars out of those players. We don't sell the players. We don't market the players. You go back to, I suppose, even as far back as the 90s. It's the last time that you had recognisable players for people that aren't rugby league people. You know, so your Martin Fires and your El Randlers and people like that. They're probably the last household names really that people can name that aren't rugby league followers. You know, so we need to market the players now. We need to get them out there in the public domain and get them on TV shows and get them doing different stuff and get them out there so people know who they are. Dom Young's a prime example now. You know, it could be an absolute superstar. It could be an absolute superstar. And while he's doing what he's doing now, and doing what he's doing over in the NRL, get him out there, flood him on TV. I mean, I'm not a massive fan of reality TV, but Jacques O'Neill, that went into whatever he went into last year, you know, there's a lot of people that know him purely and simply because he went on to whatever programme he went on.
I'm trying not to say Love Island because then I know what it was.
A lot of that comes down to access, though, and while the access in rugby league is generally better than most other sports, it's not as good as it could be. I mean, you look at the Samoan example, the coach banned his players from talking to me after the game. I mean, that was one of the games of this year, if not for, you know, like England, for example, I think they only do 2 media ops a week between games. Is that enough? I don't think it is, but you know, if you only just get your same media that already covers the game and you're not branching out to national media, you rarely do, then you're not spreading that message.
I can understand it while a tournament's going on, because obviously you don't want them going off doing TV programmes while there's a tournament going on.
Yeah.
But outside of the tournament, you know, there's 365 days a year where you can get out there and market the players, and the players can go out there and market the sport. And I think we do need to take a little bit of step outside the box, and I've wrote about it in the column where the Magic. I'm not a massive fan of Magic Weekend. I think we've saturated the market of Magic Weekend now. People have been and they've done it, and some will go year in, year out. Some aren't that bothered anymore because they've been. So we need to do something different, and I think the way to attract people's attention now, nobody wants to sit and watch an 80-minute game. And I think that's why Magic doesn't work, because nobody wants to sit and watch four 80-minute games or 3 80-minute games in one day. Our society is now, I call it a microwave society. People want to put it in the microwave for 2 minutes and it's done. So we need to have something that's fast, that's attractive, it catches people's attention. And I've joked about it. I came up with an idea while I sat on toilet. You know, that I'm sure people can think about it a little bit more deeply than what I did. But I just said, right, League One club, Championship club, Super League club. Have a 6-a-side competition. Can bring in different rules. So it's not the version of Rugby League that we all know. It can be a different version of Rugby League. It might be less tackles. It might be if a player knocks on, you've got to lose a player, so you improve the score. Whatever it might be. But each team is made up of 9 players, 3 from a League One club, 3 from a Championship club, 3 from a Super League club. There's got to be 2 players from each club on the field at one time, so you're not having all the Super League players and Championship players on. So each club is represented. Visit something, you do like the 100 now, where you make up different teams. And we can market it to a different audience, there's a different TV deal, a different TV audience, different sponsors potentially. And the games are short, they're sharp, and whatever you want to do with it. And that's just an idea off the top of my head. But we need to do something different to what we're doing now and what we've done for the last 25, 30 years. Because what we've done only works to a certain extent, to a certain market, and we've got to look further afield now and try to attract people to look at it in a different way.
I think just on that access issue, though, that happens all year round. I mean, some of the best young English players in Super League are just unavailable for interview, basically, first 2 years in first grade. And even, you know, I've chatted to the father of one of them, and they're quite happy for them to do an interview. It's not a case of the media doing it over them, but the clubs want to keep them quiet because they know if they do really well and they're a star, the NRL will come and get them, or they'll go to rugby union, and they'll have more money that they can afford to keep them. So I think that's part of the IMG remit, is to change that kind of the way that the media managers operate and the way that clubs promote themselves. But just on what you said there, I think Nines is the opportunity there. I think IMG are looking at that. I was at the trying to remember, it was 2019 World Cup. We had a World Cup Nines quickly and gone, but it was actually a great event. You know, it was men and women. There was a lot of countries, and I think you can have a League One club against a Super League club in Nines or Championship, because it's not going to be a blowout. Obviously, if we don't have 6 again, it's not going to be a ridiculous blowout because it's a small format, and you can introduce special rules. You can have former players. You know, you could get what they did in the NRL Nines. You know, had Brad Fittler come and play for the Roosters. You could get Kevin Simcoe could easily play. You know, he's the fittest man alive. You could get him coming. You know, I think there's different ways, and that would bring in a different audience, I think.
The other thing about making heroes of people, which you're absolutely right, is something that we need to do, is that we don't now have to rely on just Dom Young. When people are talking about Amy Hardcastle, they're talking about Jack Brown, you know, they're talking about Nathan Collins. We've got a whole raft of, you know, the gift of this 3 World Cups together, 4 if you include the PDRL. There's some brilliant stories in PDRL. You've got so many more people that are marketable. It's having the strategy now to get them out there, talking about their sport, their backstory. They're amazing. and we have now got that resource. In the past we might not have done, but it's hard to keep a lid on something now if it's spreading. We just need to let it go.
And it's how do we get those stories in the papers, and how do we get these new superstars across? Because as Craig rightly says, if TV companies go looking for a rugby league person to interview, they're probably going to get Martin O'Fire again.
Yeah. We do need to make more of Dom Young, otherwise he'll go to rugby union and we've lost him for good. It's difficult to get into newspapers now. They're less and less inclined to promote rugby league. It needs some strong leadership from the RFL, which we haven't got, or IMG could take the lead. But it's a really, it's banging your head against a big wall at times. There's a lot of bias goes on in national newspapers against rugby league. The Daily Mail just hate rugby league. I know they make exceptions from time to time, but it's tough. It's breaking down barriers. Those barriers are getting a little bit higher at the moment.
Rugby league and foreigners. There you go.
Well, I think it's a numbers game as well in most things, isn't it? So if you've got the numbers and you've got more people, if you look at rugby league and you look at, I don't know how many participation and professional, it's tiny. So if it gets bigger, then people have to, because that's what they want. They want the numbers, they want access to people, and that's the thing of what this is all about. It's trying to make it bigger and make people more identify with the game and go, oh yeah, that's